So let's just unclip this probe off this working board. I'll just take this ground wire. I'm going to reuse this on the next board. And I have two boards here from FMX on our Discord, who I chat to quite often. I remember the name. And he's got two that he'd like restored. There's different problems in each, but the general gist by the looks of it is they both seem to get to red light boot, but neither load a game. So these are perfect examples to fix. I'll do a quick diagnosis. I don't know whether I'm going to fix them, like I say. I'll show you where the problem is, but depending on how long the fix would take, we might do that in a separate video. But let's at least see if we can use the scope and this knowledge to now find where the problem lies on these boards. So let's just move this one out of the way. This is the Europe one. We'll work on this one first. I've got a Sonic game here. We'll use Sonic 2, what we've just been using, to keep things the same. Let me just solder a ground wire on. Let's attach the ground of the probe. Zoom in. Remember, test without the game in first, because we want to see the behavior as normal without a game. This is an original screen, so if I connect the clean juice, I could enable the 34 volt line for the screen. I'm not going to bother at the minute because you don't need the screen to see. Also, be cautious on these when you've got the original transformers in. I think mainly around here, you can get 120 volt blast, and it really does hurt. So when you've got the original components on, do be careful. There's high voltage, on this board to touch. So try and keep your fingers away from, these areas here, sort of thing, both top and sides. Got the probe on, no game in, turn on. We have red light boot. So the first check, if you remember, was to check the ASICs down here for valid H-sync and V-sync pulses. So V-sync should be here. And there's V-sync. If I quickly change the time to long enough to actually see, you can see there's V-sync. And then if I probe, what is it on here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pins in there. Make the time a bit quicker. There's H-sync. So this is booting in a sense that the ASIC is up and running. So the next step then, straight to the cartridge connector, and let's go through these pins. I'll change my timing on my scope down to 5 microseconds. I'll change this back to 10 volts instead of 5, so we're back to where we were. And on the cartridge pins, let's go down them one at a time, and let's see what problem we have. So we might not have a problem with the game out, you might find it's when it's in. So 5 volts we have. Right shouldn't be doing anything, which it isn't. Address 12 sometimes does or doesn't, which it isn't doing anything. So 7. 6 is, which was similar to before, so 12 and 7 never had activity. 6 and the likes before did, so that's 5. 4. 3. Oh. So, that's my ground wire snapped off. Did a bad soldering job there. Let me just chuck a ground wire back on a big ground pad. Which, interestingly, that's what it looks like when you have a bad ground. When your probe isn't grounded, you'll get something similar to that. You've got no reference point. And there's that. Where were we? So we had 5 volts. Right, 12, 7. And then we got to here, which was 6, 5, 4, 3, and I'll show you when I find something that's faulty. 2, 1. The obvious is if there's no signal where there should be, such as data lines 6 to 0 that we just tested on the address lines, have nothing on them, which would indicate a broken trace. Data 0 is high and wiggly, which we want. Data 1, data 0, so they all seem the same. 3 ground points. Next pad is data 3, which is good. Data 4, data 5, and these should all just be high and wiggly. Data 6, and then data 7. So they all look good. Memory request, got the pulses on. Address 10 has got nothing on, which is right, it didn't before. The read is right. The EXM2 is right. Now address 15 should have nothing, 11 should have nothing, and I think none of these should have actually. I don't think 9 has anything, 8, 13 or 14. So all those look correct. That pin, the 5 volts we should get here. The IO request pin, if we just jump to that, should not show a game loading, which it isn't. The reset over here should be high, held out of reset, which it is. So that all looks good. Let's just jump down to now the main RAM. And because this isn't loading, what we could do is cheat and jump in now. I think, to be honest, once you get to this point, and you can see that there is no data activity, which would indicate potentially something overriding your data pins, you can forego probing every single pin without a game in, because it's now going to act the right way when a game's in. So the only reason to probe without a game initially is to make sure that the IO request pin doesn't load up and the data pins don't start seeing random data, because that's going to identify that potentially this RAM's bad. So that's as far as I'm actually going to probe without a game in. I'm going to turn off the clean juice. I'm going to put Sonic in. And I'm going to turn on. The first thing I'm going to do is jump straight to the IO request pin. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back. And you can see it's apparently loading the game, because that has only ever shown when there's a valid game to load. So if it is loading a game, let's do the true check. Are we actually getting audio down here? So that would be the, if you remember, the double ground pin here. It's the pin next to it, which is there. And do we get audio? So for seeing that, I'm going to go to my scope, turn off the trigger, turn the time up to 5 milliseconds. Yeah, so this is actually not loaded a game because the audio has no audio. So what we have here is, you can tell it's trying to load part of the game because we have the IO request pin, which has actually now disappeared. Let's turn that off and on again. So now no, it's trying. So it's intermittently, I think we were lucky then. There we go. Now it's thinking it's loading a game. So if we go back to the 5 milliseconds, put the trigger back on, you can see that it thinks it's loading the game based on this IO request pin. But as mentioned, we have no audio when we check for the audio down here, which is the final check that really kind of confirms if we do. So it looks like the system in general is working, but I bet we've got a faulty address or data line, so it's not fully and correctly loading the game. So let's go back to the address pins then, and let's probe through. And you should find that we find, I'm suspecting, just a broken trace on one of the pins somewhere. So let's go through them again. 5 volt we have. The right pin is not firing, which is another indicator that it's working, because once it's loaded, it then tries to involve the main RAM, which requires a write signal. Address 12 isn't firing either, which it should do when it's loading a game. But address 7 is. So it's getting so far into a load and then just failing in a loop by the looks of it. So address 12, nothing. Address 7, the same position. Address 6. And the one thing we've got to be careful of here is, because we're not seeing anything on address 12, and we should do when there's a game load, let's just see if it tries it on first boot at all. Yeah, there you go. So on first boot it is trying to load an address, then it fails and changes. So a trick as well, if you turn the console off and turn it on, the first 2 seconds of boot do tend to act different than the other stages of boot. So we have activity on address pin 12, which shows that simply that the wire is physically joined, which is what we're interested in, so that's working. But it only shows on the first few seconds. So address 12's good, 7's good, and we're not looking for any specifics here at the minute now. I'm looking at the fact that it doesn't load for a physically broken or bad pin, which is what I'm suspecting. So address 6, address 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So all those look fine. Data now. we should be getting data back, and this should be the game giving us this data. And that looks pretty much the same data over and over, but it will be because the address line doesn't seem to be changing. Data 1. Data 2. So we have data on them, 3 ground lines. Data 3 looks a little bit suspect. This is what's making me think a little bit suspect. See how it's only 2.5 volts? But the data is changing, so I'm not 100% convinced that's a bad line. It's just a little bit suspect, something to bear in mind while we're going down the line. And we are now on pin... let's go backwards, I forgot where we are. Data 4, data 5, data 6. Again, that's pretty suspect. That data 6 doesn't look great. You shouldn't have all of these peaks. So I'll just show you these peaks. See all these half peaks here that aren't all the way up. I wouldn't expect to see that. So if I just turn that off, take Sonic out, turn on. Oh yeah, so on that specific pin, because they all act slightly different, we're seeing these half peaks here. So these peaks that already exist are fine. And then this bit where it releases control of the pin is where the data comes in. So we'll put Sonic back in. And run that, turn on. Yeah, so those peaks are fine. So now you can see the difference is the peaks are there, they always are there, but when it releases control here, just as it's releasing control, the cartridge takes over and puts data on the line. So that's actually fine. Next data pin, which I believe is data 7, looks okay. This is then the memory request pin, looks fine. Address 10 looks fine. The read is correct. The XMP is the same, and then address 15 now. So it is reading different parts of the game. Address 11. Address 9. Address 8. Seems to have stopped again. Let me just turn off and on. So all those addresses seem to be coming through. The 5-volt line's fine. The M1 is fine. The IO request that says a game's loading is firing again. Just double check while it's got that. I know we've been here before, but let's just double check. Do we see audio on these data pins? This one here. And while it's there, let me just turn off the trigger. And go slow enough to see. No. So I think it's all connected on the cartridge connector. So what that must mean is it's likely a broken trace on one of these, because remember the data lines have to make it all the way through to every chip so they can all read the same data. So next we're going to move to probing all of these pins on the two chips. And we're just looking for that same data happening. So starting at the top, data, you've got data 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then a chip select. So data 3 looks fine, 4 is fine, 5 is fine, 6 is fine. Let's just zoom in. 2, 3, 4, 5. All those data pins seem fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And pin 6, where it's engaging this RAM, seems fine. The address has got data. The read has got data. The other address, yep. That address. That address. High voltage. The right pin. It's got nothing. Let's go up to the top. So this has got ground. Then we've got 3 data pins. 1. Yep, they seem fine. Then we've got address pins. We've got the rest of these now all the way to the bottom bar. The last one are just address pins, so every one of these should be pulsing. Yep, so that's all fine. Now let's check the MPU. So this should have read pin here. Fine. The right pin, which is that, fine. We don't care about any of these bar the reset pin, which is pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down. This should be high to be held out of reset, which it is, so that pin's fine. And then if we go backwards up, all these should be address pins. So we should see clean, solid pins going up. And then they stop at this thick line, which is then a ground pin. So that side's all fine. The IO request to say it's loading a game, which was toggling on the cartridge, so I presume we'll see it here. It's not toggling, but let's check the cartridge connector as well. So that isn't toggling this time. It seems to go intermittent when that toggles. So it's toggling now. Jump back to the chip on here. It's not toggling there. It's no longer toggling there, so it just toggles on the initial boot. So turn it off, turn it on. Yep, and then it loads there and then stops. So it's like trying to load a game and failing. We don't care about the next 4 pins. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't care about the 5th pin here as the start of data again. So there's 4 more data pins. That looks fine. Looks fine. Looks fine. That looks fine. Then we've got 5 volts next, which it is. Then we've got 4 more data again. 1, 2, 3, 4 data. The next pin is a clock pin, the cartridge clock pin, which is running, and then address line. So every one of these should have data. So all of them are good. So there's only 2 things left to check. One is the ASICs here. So make sure all the pins have connections here. And then failing that, my suspicion is the cartridge connector is not letting the data come through the cartridge. So we're not far off now, and we should basically see an issue. I've never found one where I haven't come across an issue based on these pins. So we shouldn't be far off discovering it now. So we're now going to probe, as I mentioned before, that those address pins all here, and the data pins here in blue, and these couple of address here, and then the data across here are all valid. So we just need to probe every one of them to make sure they're all good and working. Basically solid connections. So if we zoom in, this is the left ASIC. Second pin should be address. So if we start there, got an address, and then all the way down to the very end of the chip, every single pin should have data on. So they should have address lines, then data lines, and it should be easy to spot when they change. So that's address, address, yeah. And this is data line, and you can see here the data line is when these traces come in and join the two ASICs together. So this kind of arch of pins over here is the data lines. So if we go on that data line, you can see we still have data there, 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 there. Yep, so all of them have data. Going across to the next one, this one should have data. And then if we skip 2 and go to the third one down, sorry, if we skip 1 and go to the next 2, where these 2 lines go, these are address pins. So we have them. Now back to the top, the corner one's not connected, and then nearly all of them across are data with a few addresses. You can see all the data clearly by these traces coming in. So data on these again. It's important to test as well the top of the chip here, not the trace at the bottom. So if we touch here, but this isn't soldered right, it's going to give us a false reading. So always test the top of the chip, so right on the top. That's assuring then what the ASIC is actually getting into its package is as close as accurate as we can be. So that's all the data pins. After that, we ignore the next pin, but the pin after should be address again. And we have another 3 addresses that we care about, and that's about it. So address, 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 they're all good. The IO request, which is when it's loaded a game, this is the one that should toggle if we turn off and on, which it does. And the read and the write pins. So write, or read rather, and write. And the write pin works when you first turn it on and then stops. So by the looks of these scopes, every single connection of the address and data line is valid from here to here to here to here to here, which is a good sign, but that only leaves us one suspect now, which is good in a way because now you're going to see every step in finding a problem. If you get a game cartridge, remove the screw from the back, take off the cover, you're left with a game cartridge like this. Now what we can do, and I'm going to make like a test circuit board, so we can just sell a circuit board that's just got pins that go in here, and then pins we can probe to check, in essence, that the metal here that we've probed makes it through, out to these pins here, and to the circuit board of the game. So the only remaining suspicion now, which in my eyes has to be it, otherwise I genuinely don't know what's causing this problem, is that with this game inserted, we should see valid signals coming through here, but when they make it to this chip, one or more of these signals is messed up. That would indicate a dirty cartridge connector inside here that needs filing down, cleaning, or replacing. So that's my presumption now, simply from process of elimination. Based on probing all these pins, they're all good, they all seem to connect. Everything I currently know that stops it booting is all working and all connected, which must mean it's failing to load the data off the game. That would mean either the game is bad, which it can't be because I know this is a working game, or the cartridge connector is making a bad connection between it. So it's as simple as inserting a cartridge that you know works ideally with the back off, turning the console on, and let's start probing again. And my suspicion now is on these pads we should hopefully see faulty pins. So that pin's fine, data there, data there, data, 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 data. It's all looking good so far. And there we go. Ta-da! So there's your bad pin. Let's carry on probing them in. That's also bad. That's okay just about. That's okay, and I'll go back and show you in a second what the fault is. That's fine. That's possibly not loading, but if we just turn off and on, it should request that data initially. Oh, there we go, it did. That's fine. Fine, fine. That's bad, clearly. That's fine. That's bad. Oh, there we go, no, that's good. 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 Key a little bit messy, so that's a little bit dirty. Okay, so we have a bad pin on pin 4 here. Is it pin 4? That's now corrected itself, but then that's gone bad here, pin 3. So it's definitely a faulty cartridge connector. But you saw this pin around here, which I believe was the 4th pin down. It could have been this 3rd one, but it was bad. So if I wiggle it around, there we go. See, pin 4 has gone bad again. So if we pull that up now on a scope, full screen, I shouldn't have to explain much about how this one's faulty, but if you look at that trace, how do we know this is faulty? 1, it's a repeating signal with nothing changing. 2, look at the amplitude of the voltage here. It's at the 1.5 to 2 volt range. If I wiggle the cartridge a bit, it changes and kind of settles up and down. If I pull the cartridge up, you gain a bit of data. But even the data there, if I go backwards, when I was pulling the cartridge up, notice this here, all this kind of upping and downing in the middle of a flat signal. That's not normal. It should be flat at the top. These bottom halves can be ignored. That's normally when there's no data at all. But you can see clearly that that signal goes from working to not working. The pin next to it, we can see here again, if you look at that, this is just all below 1 volt and it's all kind of weird waves. If we were to probe on the same pin on the cartridge connector for that data, this is what's going in. This is the address line. It's saying, right, this is the address I want to read. So we have the address it wants to read on the cartridge pin, and then I come up to the actual chip inside the game, and this is what's making its way through. So that's a classic sign of a bad connect. Well, it is a bad connector, basically. We had 1 or 2 on this side. I think these 2 were fault. No, those 2 started faulty but weren't, but one of these was. So that one there as well, which is just completely messed up signal. So this is one of the address lines again, I believe, or might be the data line, but I'm pretty sure that's an address line. And again, telltale sign is it's lower voltage, lower amplitude, and just looks nothing like the others. So now we know that's the problem, and I can guarantee you that's the problem because we've seen it on the scope. There's no guessing. We're not saying, oh, it could be this, it could be that. We are absolutely confident it's this connector. Let's just take a look inside, and let's see if we can see the damage. So it seemed to be a couple of pins here and a pin here. So let's just see if we can see the problem by looking into the cartridge connector. And you can see the cartridge connector has, just move that out of the way a second. You can see it has a little bit of green on it. It's actually hard to pick up on here. No, visually, it doesn't look too bad. So you can't tell looking at it, although some pins are a little bit corroded. The microscope doesn't pick it up as good as the eye does, but overall those pins, you wouldn't look at those and go, those are faulty pins. What you can see though is some pins are deeper in than others. So if you see the depth of the pin inside the cartridge connector as you're looking down, some pins are further in than others. So you can, and this is again, it's easier to kind of show, I think from a distance, you can get your tweezers, go down into the cartridge connector and grab the pin and pull it out. So it's really difficult to do on camera, just because I can't put my head over to see down. I'm having to look at just the camera lens. But if you go down to the bottom legs where it doesn't want to focus, and you can grab and see how I can pull that out, and you can grab and pull out. Now you don't want to twist them like I'm doing slightly here just due to the camera angle. You want to kind of keep them straight. But you can pull all the bottom legs out, you can pull these top legs out, so they're more springy and they're going to make more contact with the actual game. So that's the first step. Go all the way down here, pull all these out. The next step is to get a file. So just get a normal metal file, a small metal file, which I'll go and grab. And we're going to just clean up and down all these pins, then IPA them and bend them out. And then I'll guarantee you'll see this should fix the board. So that's all the pins bent out on the cartridge connector. You can actually see a little bit of powdery and greeniness when you look actually. And I'm just going to take a little file, so it's just a little metal file. And all I'm going to do, and this is because IPA doesn't do the job on this, you can try warm vinegar, you can try IPA, sometimes you just need a metal file. So you're going to insert the metal file in the hole and rub up and down. And I'm trying to push towards this way, so that I'm pushing against the pins. And if I just go all the way down the cartridge, that should do. Get some IPA. Smother the connector in IPA. Get a game. Insert in and out. And then let's go for a boot. And fingers crossed. Ta-da! We have a booting game. So that's now the game booting. And you can see so that's that one fixed. Now you can see how you'd have probably never thought from just looking at this board or looking at the cartridge connector and IPAing, you'd have never presumed the cartridge connector was bad. But clearly, based on using the oscilloscope, and I mentioned before we even got here that I could almost guarantee it's going to be the cartridge connector because I know for a fact there's nothing left and the fault must lie in the last part of the circuit. So that's the main benefit of an oscilloscope. You can prove what the fault is. You're not guessing, you're not wondering, you're not presuming, you're doing deductive reasoning and you're figuring out exactly what's wrong. So that's this board fixed. I'll save the other board, which is this second one, and I'll do an actual repair video so you can repeat this process. If you have any questions about what I've done so far and you want more clarity, let me know in the comments before I get round to fixing this board, and then I can make sure I cover them in the next video when I fix this console. So I hope you learned something there. It's a lot to take in one go, from going to not using an oscilloscope to probing all the data and address line pins, going through 2A6, an MPU and RAM, a cartridge connector, and you might not fully understand what's gone on, but hopefully this is a start to you learning more about the console, how to use scopes, and how to correctly diagnose and fix problems. As always, any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Jump on our Discord as well if you like. It's got over 1,000 members now, doing really well. And we help customers as well as just the general public every day on repairing all kinds of consoles. I'll catch you in the next one, guys.